This scene is so quick, if you're not even paying attention, you could easily just miss what happens here. That's just how ridiculously fast it is. But in a way, I think this really kind of hammers in just how something can really go wrong in just a fraction of a second. One split second decision could just be the end of everything. And I think that this really is just such a emotional episode. There is a lot of dark moments throughout Mushoku Tensei to this very point, like we could think about, like to the whole battle with, the Dragon God and, Eris, Rudeus, and, Rudy. But there's been moments of sadness as well, like the whole Paul argument with Rudy and stuff. There's been moments that really just make you think from different, angles and be like, man, this is pretty sad and depressing. But this episode, I think, is a step up in terms of that darkness. It may not be necessarily like edgy where there's people dying here and there throughout, the episode and all that, but it's a dark episode because of the content that it is covering and what message this episode is conveying. And let's get right into that. So this episode obviously has a lot of just moments to where you could be like, wow, this is kind of hilarious that, Rudy, he can't have a moment with Sarah. Like, he's failed and all that, he can't, straight up, satisfy her and all that. And people will be quick to just laugh this off, saying, wow, this man's wanting to end it all because of that. But there's just so much more that's going on within this episode than just that. And I feel like a lot of people are just looking at surface level are going to laugh at it. They're going to be like, oh, this is funny. This man's going this far. It's kind of pathetic. That's what people are probably going to say. And I've already seen a few already say this over the years, but I know it's definitely going to increase thanks to this episode's release. But after this scene, we have Rudy go to the tavern and he starts to drink. And then he starts to express his problems of what's going on and all that. And as he's punching this man that's given him a lot of animosity. He's getting his anger out. He reveals basically everything that's been on his mind. And I think that if there is one thing I do definitely need to say before I go any further, the directing of this episode was a hell of a lot more cohesive and solid in comparison to the previous episode. Remember what I talked about? How I said, yeah, the episode had a lot going on. You could definitely get some messages here and what's going on throughout the story, but it felt like there was just so many different themes and stuff going on within the episode, there wasn't one clear message that the episode was really trying to convey. Well, this episode completely fixes that. There is a lot of content that happens within this, but it is one clear, straight message. Rudy is at the bottom of his life. He is rock bottom. He feels like there is just nothing more he can do. But what scene better conveys that than what I showed at the beginning of the video with this man, literally thinking of just ending it all because, he accidentally embarrassed himself in front of Sarah, and it's just one thing after another. I think legitimately, this is a really dark episode because of the themes it follows. And let's dive into that. So Rudy, why? Let's get into this. What is the real problem here? Well, it's what you can see on screen. Why did Eris leave him? And I think that this really kind of hammers in why Rudy just seems so disconnected from the audience for these past few episodes. I've been seeing it. Basically, ever since, episode 1 came out, and then episode 2 last week, there's been few that have said, why does Rudy just feel different? Why can't people connect with him, etc.? People felt like he just felt very different as a character in comparison to how he was at the end of Season 1, or hell, even just throughout the story. He just felt very different. And obviously, with just this whole reveal here of him kind of, crying, breaking down, and telling it like it is, you come to find out the real reason. Eris left him. He's depressed. He's sad. And there is so much more here than just that. I mean, this man literally feels like he's been abandoned. He feels like everyone that he cares about, everyone that he loves, just ends up leaving. And you gotta think about this, okay? Rudy, throughout his previous life, before he was reincarnated, he didn't really have any connections, he didn't have any family he really cared about, he was just isolated, and, he was someone that just stayed at home, he never left, he was traumatized, had PTSD, all that type of stuff, and then eventually, Roxy came into his life, and then kind of opened him up to where he was able to leave and become a better person, and then he met Sylphie, and then he was able to communicate with her, talk with her, and then, eventually, as time progressed, he met Eris, and he journeyed with Eris for years. He traveled with her, and, he met Rudeus as well. They traveled together. They were companions through thick and thin. They fought life and death battles together. And obviously, when you do that, and you fight with someone for that long, you're going to gain a sense of kinship. You're going to bond with them. You're going to love them. And obviously, thanks to just how long they were together, feelings grew between the two characters. Rudy and Eris grew to love each other. And obviously that final moment at the end of season 1 was very impactful, because Eris finally went in for her feelings, and Rudy, was like, sure, let's do this. And obviously we know the end result that, Eris walked out and left. She left a message, and then Rudy, he was left there just devastated. It's like, why? I was straight up abandoned. Was I bad? Why? I thought she loved me, but clearly he felt like she didn't love him just to walk out like that. And as I talked about in previous videos, just looking at it from everything that was conveyed, there just wasn't proper communication on both sides, and it led to a lot of issues between the characters. And I really liked the complex nature of just Eris walking out on Rudy. It wasn't that she hated him or anything, it was just that there was a complete misunderstanding of what they both were trying to achieve. But obviously that doesn't technically matter at this point in time, because Rudy right now, his perspective, everybody's left him. Rudeus left him, because obviously the journey was over. Eris left him, and it's the first time in his entire life, in a very long time, he really has just been by himself. It is the first time. And so, as he's building connections with Sarah throughout this episode and the previous episode and the episode before that, he's slowly finding once again a place to belong. He feels like finally, he's being able to be with someone, cherish his time, and a little bit of happiness is creeping into his life. It's a very beautiful segment at the beginning of the episode, that he's slowly opening up and trying his hardest to move on. I mean, he even says at the beginning, when he realizes that Sarah starts to make moves on him, that it's about time he tries to move on. And it shows that obviously the whole Eris stuff is still weighing heavily on his mind, but he realizes he can't stick in one spot and not move forward. He wants to be better. He wants to be happy. He doesn't want to be depressed. He doesn't want to be sad. He doesn't want to be anxious. He wants to actually have a future. And so, as he reciprocates the feelings that obviously Sarah conveys to him, they have almost a night of passion. They go into the room and all that, and it's literally almost a complete night of passion. And obviously in this moment, if this was, Rudy before Eris, and all that, Rudy would have been already raring to go, excited, jumping for joy. We know how much of a hound dog he was in season 1. But obviously, with his very reaction, just at the start of it alone, the way his character is conveyed and he carries himself, you could just feel something is off. Like, you don't need to see the aftermath just to know, just by the way he interacts with Sarah, that he is nervous. He's very anxious. And I really think that despite how there is some context maybe kind of harder to grasp than others, this episode does try to say, the audience is intelligent enough to catch on to this. And I feel like, to the way the voice actor and the camera angles were done, it conveys that Rudy is definitely off. This isn't how he normally would act if he was put in this situation. Yeah, you'd be a little bit, shy or embarrassed, but it wasn't necessarily that. It just really showed he did not want to mess things up. He did not want to ruin this moment, and he really wanted to make Sarah happy. That's exactly what this moment conveyed. But obviously, we know in the end result, thanks to everything that happened, it led him to drinking by himself, and, he was left. Sarah basically said the whole relationship was obligation, and even though, let's be honest, we all know that's a flat-out lie. She's basically a tsundere. She's Walmart Eris. The point of the matter is, she did say those words, and the only thing that really served to do to Rudy at that point was basically reconfirm his feelings of, how he's inadequate. He is worthless. He is, someone that is not worthy of people. And so this is why he's had this whole feeling of fakeness since the very beginning. He puts on these smiles and expressions, the way he conveys himself. He wants people to stick around, because people can tell he's putting on a facade, because, let's be honest, he's not really good at it. But, I mean, still, he is trying his best to be different. He's trying to change. He wants to be able to have companionship. He doesn't want to be alone. And I feel like anyone from that standpoint can understand the feelings of a person like that, not wanting to feel alone, not wanting to be depressed. I mean, that is a very relatable feeling deep down in the core, I think, of just human beings itself. And so when, Sarah basically is like, oh, it was obligation, why was I even wanting to do this, why was I gonna, sleep with you, it's just like, wow, that stings, especially in that moment, because we all know Rudy would like a night of passion with her. I mean, he even admitted it to himself. But the point of the matter is that, at the end of the day, he wasn't able to perform. And in that moment, obviously, Sarah took offense to that, because it's clear that she's never had any relationship and all that, and she was someone that legitimately just has never got to experience this. So she took that as, oh, Rudy has no interest or desire in her. And so from that perspective, it makes sense why she would be upset. She was legitimately upset. She tried to soothe things over, saying it's an obligation, just to basically kind of work herself out of that turmoil, because she felt in that moment she also was inadequate or not someone that could, please Rudy in that moment. So she felt like she was just ugly, probably. That's how she felt in that moment. So it's a double-edged sword. Both characters were going through a lot of turmoil, and Rudy wanted to be good for her, and Sarah did too, but obviously we know how that turned out. So this entire moment at the end, where she sees him and she slaps him and all that, it's because she legitimately does have feelings for him, but seeing him just come out drunk and all that, bad-mouthing her, going to a brothel, it obviously isn't a good look, and she was incredibly upset about it. And then obviously, Rudy realized how much he messed up trying to get over this. He made another mistake because he let out his old personality, and obviously we saw what he tried to do in this given moment. So I think that legitimately this is a very deep episode. There is a lot of depth to this episode, and there's some surface level stuff, but some underlying deeper stuff if you really want to dive into it. And like I said, even though many are going to be quick to say like, oh, Sarah's, a bad person for what she did, once again, I want to reinforce this, okay? I'm going to reinstate this. Sarah obviously has no experience. In this case, Rudy has more experience than Sarah at this point in time. It's very obvious. And I think that, she, like I said, felt like she was ugly. She just wasn't able to perform, and so she felt like she was completely rejected entirely by Rudy. She thought that Rudy would, be happy, but clearly, she felt that he wasn't, and so that's why she reacted the way she did. So it's not necessarily fully Sarah's fault either. They're both at fault because they weren't able to communicate. Rudy wasn't able to communicate how he had anxiety and depression, and Sarah wasn't able to communicate how she felt thanks to what Rudy did. And normally, this is just usually how disputes like this happen. Usually, there is just no communication. It's a very realistic example, honestly. When stuff like this happens, it's left unsaid, and it just causes a crack within a relationship of a person, and it's just left like that. And eventually, it goes so far to eventually just break the two's relationship entirely. And in this case, that's clearly what happened. And this goes back into what I talked about, that Rudy, once again, is back to being alone. He realizes that, he has no one again, and he feels like, oh, I'm inadequate, worthless. And so, yeah, like I said, he's at the bottom of his life. And another thing I want to say is, this man right here, Soldat, I don't know how to properly pronounce his name, so do forgive me on that one, but, as a character, he comes off obviously kind of like a jerk, especially when his first introduction. But as we get more of him within this episode, he's a guy that just, he wants to help out. He realizes that Rudy's been faking it. He calls Rudy out on it, and then finally Rudy opens up, and he tries to help him out in any way he can. He's like, oh, if it's, you have a performance issue and that's what it's all about, let's go fix that. So he takes him literally to a brothel to kind of fix this issue. And what this entire sequence of events kind of relays to us, it's not about this. It's not about the 18 plus stuff. It's not about Rudy, having, desire. It's about him wanting a bond. And that it's not all about just him being unable to perform. It's about literally him just having anxiety of feeling alone and people rejecting him, so to speak. That is his problem. And this is not something that just goes away instantly. It takes a long period of time, a lot of effort, and bonding with someone to really overcome an issue like this. It's not something that just goes away. And, he can't just have a relationship with a random person. That's exactly what this showed. That Rudy can't just, be happy and have all that fun time with just a random person he meets, like in a brothel. It's not going to work. So I think that, once again, this conveys that there is another layer to Mushoku Tensei. That the fan service within the story isn't just for fan service. It is there as a narrative to push the plot forward. And I think that is a very powerful statement that this episode definitely conveys. It's already done it before in previous episodes, but this episode in its entirety basically says that fundamentally Mushoku Tensei is wrapped in vulgar moments, but it is more integral to the plot than just a comedic moment or making Rudy look like a hound dog. It's so much more to it than that, and that it's multi-layered. That really kind of expresses how people can feel inadequate in moments like this. So, yeah, like I said, it's a good episode of Mushoku Tensei. I really love everything that this episode tries to convey. It's a very beautiful episode, a dark message, but it is a message none the same that should be actually talked about, and I think that's why a lot of people, and myself included, really respect Mushoku Tensei, because it's able to dive into these themes without really, kind of making it seem like it's over-dramatized or whatever, because I feel like a lot of people, if they were going through, like, years of turmoil or months of turmoil like Rudy, would get to this point if they were in his exact same shoes. They would feel this depressed, and I know it, and so, because of that, I love this episode of Mushoku Tensei. But, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video. I know this one's on a little bit of a longer side, but I really wanted to talk about this because it was a phenomenal episode, and it really just goes to show, once again, Mushoku Tensei is back to its standard quality, at least in a lot of people's eyes. We even get our favorite elf at the end of the episode, at the end of the credits, and I love her, by the way. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I can't wait to see more of her in the upcoming episodes. It's going to be fun. But be safe, stay healthy, Chibi out.